one of the first things I want us to kind of consider or think about is what's first things first. When we're talking about recruiting volunteers, there's a couple of fundamentals we have to be really mindful of before we got getting into how do I put a call out and how do I invite people and how do I get them to sign up. That if these things really don't exist, it's just going to make things harder. They're kind of things that are always true, irregardless. And the first one is that changed people change people.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, anything we do in our parish, whether it's volunteer recruitment, faith formation, a parish ministry, is really a subset of parish evangelization. Paul VI in Evangelii Nunc reminds us that the church exists to evangelize. And in other words, our churches are not denominations. They're an outpost of the Roman Catholic Church for a particular geographical area that said there are people here in need of sacraments of knowing the Lord, and we're going to put a hub, a parish there that is going to be a source of sharing that good news, of giving them sacraments, of accompanying them and helping them be holy. That we're going to give them a priest to do so, and as he discerns how to minister to them, he's going to create roles and ministries and outreach to kind of help them. And so the whole goal of the parish is to take individuals who do not know the Lord to make a decision to follow him, to be apprenticed, discipled by him, and give their life to him. Individuals who do that don't ask, why do I have to do things? They say, how can I help? And so any kind of volunteer recruitment really first flows from, is our parish having a general plan? Do we really have a plan for how we're going to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Because if someone really first accepts the gospel of Jesus Christ and accepts that God is real, that Jesus is real, that he died for me, and that I need to respond, is going to be much more likely to see the reality and the need of, I need to do something about this. In other words, if someone is not convinced by that, you're trying to convince them to help with something that they don't necessarily see the value in. You know, church might be a nice thing to them. I might come here for mass and leave. But if they've not really made a decision to follow Christ, there's no necessarily value for serving. There might not be necessarily an impetus for wanting to help and see this parish grow, as opposed to someone who has made a decision, who is more than just kind of transactional in the reception of sacraments or coming to things for the parish, and is saying, no, I'm a part of this parish because I've first been changed by Christ. That person is going to be much more likely to say yes. So honestly, this fits under just the larger picture of the work of a parish to continually evangelize, to continually change people, because changed people change people. The second is we have to very much discuss whys before whats. People don't respond too well to whats. I need you to do this thing. They really need a purpose first. There's definitely a sense of wanting to know my agency, that if I only have so much time, if I only have so much energy and money, why should I spend it in this one area? What's the value? And so we do have to generate a value proposition. We do have an understanding of, well, what are we trying to do here as a parish? Where are we trying to go? Why is this important? How does this affect you? Where do you fit in? We have to give a good sense of our why as a parish and our vision before just listing whats of things that we need. The other thing I would say is perception very much is reality. There are individuals who maybe want to help, but their perception of ministries in the parish might be negative. They might perceive certain ministries as very insular, in other words, for insiders, and not really open to other individuals wanting help. And this can occur kind of very unintentionally. In other words, there might be ministries or things in the parish who really want individuals to join. But think of it as from the perspective as an outsider. Are there ready opportunities for them to join? Are they asking for people to join? Are they asking for help? Is it easy to join? Is it easy to find ways to help? Or is it actually pretty hard? Like, do people really need to dig? If people have to click several times on a website or call several people and they're not that motivated to help, they're probably going to stop helping. So perception is reality. Do people perceive it to be easy to help at your church? Do they perceive the ministries at your church as healthy, or do they see them as kind of a negative culture or toxic? That it would kind of maybe put them off for not wanting to help. So we have to be mindful of, well, how are ministries and volunteer opportunities in our church perceived? How is our parish generally perceived by individuals coming in? And lastly, do people know their gifts? There could be a lot of times that we ask people to help, but they're like, that's not really for me. But they really could actually have the ability. They actually could have the gift to help with that, but they've never really discerned what they're good at, or they've never really discerned how that could be applied. And that's not something we really talk a lot in the Catholic Church about, at least on the local level. We talk about the Holy Spirit, and we talk about the gifts of the Spirit, and we talk about charisms, maybe in a higher level. We don't really help people discern what's my gift, what am I good at, and how could it be utilized. The St. Catherine of Siena Institute, run by Sherry Weidel, has some great trainings there, very involved, but they really do like gift inventories with individuals where they assess kind of where they are, what their faith gifts are and how they could utilize. You might think of more secular versions of, say, working geniuses or strength finders. Is there a way that we can aid parishioners to understand this is what your gift is? And these are actually some of the ministries that might be best suited for you, or some of the roles could be best suited for you that we actually think you would enjoy given your gifts. So remember, regardless of what strategy you want to employ, there's 4 things we always have to be doing. We have to remember, change people, change people. How's our parish just evangelizing individuals? Because once they're evangelized, they're much more likely to want to help. Number 2, always start with a why and give purpose before just listing needs and wants. 3, perception's reality. If people have a negative perception of ministries or the culture in your parish, they're going to be less likely to help. Likewise, if they think it's hard to get involved, they're not going to really try. And lastly, do they know their gifts? And how can we help them align what their gifts are with, say, hey, these ministries would really work for you. And here's the one variable that we always have to be mindful of. Some of the things we talked about today, maybe you've done before and it hadn't worked. The challenge with this is it is just a matter of consistency over time. To kind of share this point, you may be familiar with the innovation curve or the fusion of innovation. It's a principle that pretty much works across variety of entities or business types or what have you, that pretty much holds true. And what it basically says is when you have a new idea or a new vision or a new product, not everyone's going to accept it at once. There are always going to be people that are going to be looking for new ideas and want the newest thing. And there's always going to be people that are going to fight things. So think of it as a bell curve. Right now there's probably people, on the screen or listening to this saying, all right, I'm following this. And there's other people being like, yeah, I don't know if this is it. Like there's always going to be a spectrum of individuals when it comes to it. And most people fall within what's the majority, what's called either the early majority or the late majority. But the law of the fusion of innovation basically says you can't start with the majority. You actually have to start with a minority, and a specific minority. You have to start with what's called innovators, the first 2 to 5% of people, the ones who are always looking for a new idea. They're the ones that are creating a new idea and are driven by simply self-determinism, driven by the fact of creating new ideas. Then there are early adopters. They may not create the idea. They may not be the Steve Jobs, but they're looking to see what Steve Jobs does. They're looking to see, well, what is out there? Perhaps all these individuals here on the screen, you're coming here because you're like, I might not create the idea, but I want to know what's out there. That's an early adopter. Well, the law of innovation distribution says you need to capture between 15 to 18% of a population of people to doing something before the majority will start moving. If you just shoot for the majority and you try to get all of them at once, an idea is really not going to move. But once you have about 18% of people moving on an idea, people will take notice. And the early majority will start trying it, the late majority, and finally the laggards. The one caveat with this law is there's no set time principle. There's no guarantee of how long this will take. But again and again, it's pretty much shown to be proven. And so if we're going to generate kind of a culture of volunteerism, we have to get a sense of what is 18% of our mass-going parishioners? And how can we simply work towards 18% of our mass-going parishioners being involved? And if we're not there, who are kind of the top 5% that we can really meet with and leverage and saying, here's a vision for our parish. We want to be a parish where people are involved. They're giving of their times and talent. You 5% are already really involved. We need you to help us to build this culture and reach the next 12.5% of our parish. And if you're already at 18%, you can say, hey, we need you to really make this public. And we really need you to help us to invite the next majority of our parish. If you do that year after year after year as a primary goal, not as something that we get to if it's nice, but as a primary goal for the parish, over time, while it's not a guarantee it'll happen in a set amount of time, over time, it will change the culture. And that's so essential because any strategy we'll talk about today is only as good as the culture it's implemented in. Or as someone has told me before, they like to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we'll go, yes, we want to implement good strategies. How can we continually always have at the forefront changing our culture to one that's open to giving of time and talent? That being said, what are maybe just good 4 steps, 4 general sense steps? If we're going to find help, what do we need to do? And I would outline it in 4 ways. 1, how do you discern? Number 2, how do you prime? Number 3, how do you ask? And number 4, how do you follow up on that ask? And so what I've noticed with some parishes is there's a lot of focus on how do you make an ask. But really a good ask needs to be primed and it needs to be discerned. And there's a much higher likelihood of a yes being given if there's discernment and priming before you actually make the ask. And if you're wondering, my gosh, this is actually pretty involved, the reality is it is. Developing a volunteer culture actually does take time. But think of it this way. It is front-loading work to help you down the road. It is front-loading work so you don't burn out later because you're the only one doing it. It's front-loading work so that your parish doesn't peter out from the same people always doing things. So yes, while it does take a little bit of work up front, over time, consistently being built does grow over time. That being said, I do want to pause and I do want your kind of answers to this is, if you look at it right now, because I'm not assuming the things we're talking about that no one on here is already doing. You might already be doing some of this, and I'd like to hear so that other people on this call can learn from what you're already doing. So I want to ask you this question. What do you already do to discern what's needed and who to ask? In other words, when you're trying to make an ask, how do you go about figuring out what you need and who you're going to ask? If you want to take a minute and perhaps share that, you can unmute yourself.
Well, David, honestly, I just see who's there at Mass, who I see involved, and kind of their devotion or like spirit of being there, which I guess kind of hits on your first thing of like that they're already changed in some way of participating.
Mm.
And then going from there, kind of like seeing just how to get to know them and then trying to get to know them to see where they might want or be interested in helping.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that kind of requires you to be present at the masses, to be present in the community. And I think it's a really great point, Mother. Thank you. Others, what do you already do to discern what's needed and who to ask?
I have a little bit of a built-in mechanism that's already existing at the parish. We have a monthly social Sunday after Sunday masses that's hosted by a different ministry each month. And so part of that is the opportunity for the leader of the ministry to get up and give a brief presentation about what the ministry is doing and where they might have needs. And we have a sign-up sheet that's put out. And I do kind of know what I need for faith formation. And so I did get signups this past month, mostly because I was looking for dinner volunteers. One thing that we do is serve dinner to our students on Monday nights before we start classes. And I was able to get 3 or 4 people who were interested in helping out with dinners. So I just used the social mechanism.
That's fantastic. Yeah, having something consistent that is relational. Yeah, that's a great example, Julie. Thank you. Others. All right, well, keep thinking about it. Oh, Benny, yeah, you can join on.
I was just going to say that one of our approaches, we've done many throughout the years. We have an open house where we have our tables of people of groups in our parish that need volunteers, and we have representation from all those groups, and we're there after every mass, just to be able to give people information on, here's what our group does. We'd love to have you, and people do that. I myself, one of the ways I do is I use the sports analogy. Who's got skin in the game? And when you're talking about faith formation, it's your parents who have skin in the game. And so when it becomes hard to get just a general parishioner, I go to the parents. I mean, you're already bringing your child, you're with them here. How would you like to help us out?
Right.
Because we use a facilitated type of program, we're looking for, again, just people who want to have conversations with young people. Just be part of those conversations, not necessarily lead the teaching or anything else, but just to be there to talk to our youth.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome examples. So let's build off of that and these great examples. The first thing that I would really encourage you to do, if you don't already do this, is define the purpose of your ministry that you're trying to do. The reason for this is you ultimately need to, again, like I said, give a value proposition to someone who's not involved as to why does this matter? Like, why should I even get involved with your ministry or with your program? Why my time is valuable, my money is valuable. Why should I be giving it to you over something else? And part of this, they want to know, just like with their money, with their time, how will my time make a difference? And so because of that, we have to first define, well, what's really the purpose for our ministry and program? How does it help our parish? How does it help our kids? How does it help our people? How does it help our community? Why should someone care about it existing? And defining what does success look like. Everyone wants to be part of a winning team. When they feel like they are making an impact that's going to lend them to having a positive perception of being involved and saying, I continue involved, not only because I can make a difference, but because I feel like it's changing me. If you talk to people who continue to volunteer and they say, why are you involved? They'll talk about how they like it, in part because not only what it does for them, but how they feel like they've changed over time. And so there has to be a sense of what does success look like, how they can make an impact and how it can change them. So defining that purpose first and foremost is really, really key. Because if you can't explain to them why they should be involved and why it's important, they can't do that for you. You can't assume that they're going to know that. The second piece is define the need, as some of you have already identified. Look at your ministry, look at your program, look at what you do and say, well, what is needed to be done? And once you talk about what's needed to be done, talk about, well, what should be done? What are the things that I should be getting to, but I can't, maybe because of time, maybe because of skill sets, whatever they are. Again, shoot for the ideal, not just the real. Because if we just shoot for the real, we'll never get to the ideal. But once you kind of identify, well, this is what's needed, this is where I'd like to be and what should be done, think about, well, what skill sets do I not have? What skill sets would it be really helpful to have someone else who might have it to come alongside so we can actually get to where it should be? And then once you identified that, sit down with that list of items and say, well, what exactly do I need to do? Maybe there are certain things you need to do because of their confidential nature, sensitive information, background checks, personal information like communications. There might be certain things, what have you, that you just simply need to do as a staff person or as a coordinator. But what are the things that could be done by someone else? And this is where you start creating some clarity about what roles could be needed, what specificity, what specific roles could I create. So it's not just asking for volunteers to help with a ministry, but specifically asking for a certain task or a certain role. The reason why that's important is then you can better align your ask with someone's specific skill sets. It's one thing to put a general call out for a general topic, and you might get individuals, especially individuals who just want to get involved. It's different when you're trying to discern who to ask about we're trying to do this one specific thing, who really has the gifts to do that one specific thing? Or by making a really specific ask and role, someone who doesn't know how to serve, that'll kind of tip them off to say, well, I know what I'm good at. That sounds like something I would be good at, because you've defined the role, because you've defined the need. And then the last one is discern then who to be asked. This should actually really be kind of a team sport in kind of discerning. Take your team, whoever your team is, if you have a team, whether you're part of parish council, whether you're part of a catechetical staff or a parish staff, and just make a list of who is not involved that you know from your interactions after Mass, from your interactions at those hospitality gatherings, who would be good to ask. If you don't have a team, gather with 2 or 3 people that you trust or who already help you in your ministry, maybe fellow catechists, for parish council members, and say, hey, let's kind of discern together, actually in prayer, who the Lord wants us to invite. And here's the reality. You don't need to know everyone. There are certain people, you might know who they are in your parish, who they just kind of know everyone. They're what we call connectors. They're good at connecting with individuals, building relationships, knowing who's who in the community. Maybe you're that person. Maybe you're not. But the reality is you don't need to be the person who knows everyone. You just need to know who does. And even if you are a connector, finding other connectors in your parish to do this is really, really paramount. If you are not already meeting with these individuals, my encouragement is after you've kind of made a short list of who to ask, meet with your pastor, even one-on-one, meet with your staff. If you're not already doing this with your staff, meet with your parish council. If you're not already doing this with parish council, and each ask them to say, hey, we're trying to work on this ministry, on this faith formation program, what have you. Are there 2, 3, 4 names of individuals that you think would be good? Are there individuals perhaps that you have met after Mass that you'd be, hey, it'd be really good to follow up with that person? And what you start doing through kind of these layers of discernment is you start growing kind of a list. Or you start realizing, hey, this name keeps coming up. There's someone I recognize, Father mentioned their name, so-and-so also mentioned their name. Yeah, this is really someone we want to prioritize to reach out to. Similarly, and some of you have already hinted at this, there's 3 areas of individuals to look for. Those on the periphery. What I mean by that are, if you're running a program or a ministry, there might be individuals who are around it. They might go to it periodically. They might drop off their kids periodically. They're not involved, but they're more present, or they're around. They linger. They linger after Mass. They'll come to parish events and programs. They're kind of on the periphery. They're not yet in it. That's a good group of people to, how do I get to know them? How do I have conversations with them to eventually potentially understand how they could fit in and how to invite them? Think about if there's just naturally people that come to mind that just have certain gifts, that once you've defined what you need and a certain role that you need in your ministry or in your program, yeah, that person really has these gifts, or these 2 people really have these gifts. That's what I'm going to start with first. And lastly, start with those who are new to the parish, to potentially invite them to get involved. And to this point, consider, does your parish have a way to capture what people do or would like to do when they join? Very low-hanging fruit. Does parish registration have a way to indicate what people's jobs and skill sets are, where they'd like to get involved? And then do you actually follow up with it? I know when I've registered, I've listed what I've done for a living, that I've been a teacher, that I've worked in parishes, and I've never gotten a call back from the parish to actually help. And so are we being attentive to what are people's natural skill sets or things that they do that could translate? Is there something on our website that an individual could simply fill out to include what they do, what their skill sets are, even if it's not what they'd be interested in? And do we actually follow up with? So it's about kind of creating a couple different buckets: discerning with your team, discerning with your parish, your staff, or councils, being present in the community, getting to know people, and that way you kind of know what their gifts are, and having some standing mechanisms, say like your parish registration or just new invites, individuals coming in for baptisms or weddings, where you can kind of capture, what do we do? What are your skill sets? And then reaching out to them in a low risk way of saying, hey, you named that you do this. We'd like to tell you more about X. Would this be something that we wanted to invite you just to learn more about? And if they say no, they say no. But if you never ask, 100%, you're going to get a no. If you ask, you might get no's, and we have to be okay with getting no. There's a much higher chance of getting a yes. So I want you to take a moment right now, and I want you to think, and I want you to just write down who are 2 to 3 people that you could discern with. Who is someone who's a connector? In other words, they know people in your parish, and you'd like to sit down with them to get ideas of perhaps who could be a good individual to invite. Is it your team? Is it your parish council? Take a minute, write down 2 to 3 names of people that could help you discern a list of individuals to invite. Everyone had a list? Got a couple names? Then you can share maybe what one of your names are. And this next question is how do you talk about the need for volunteers in your parish? So when you're talking about, oh, we need volunteers, how do you talk about that in your parish? How do you share out the need for, hey, we need volunteers in our parish right now? So when you mute yourself, you can maybe say one name of a person that you said I can really discern with, and how you talk about volunteers in your parish.
All right, for a name, I can think of one person who's been here a very long time and volunteers quite a bit, and she knows most everybody, and that would be Margie.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Margie's very knowledgeable.
And how do you, if you can say a word, Gloria, or even Benny too, how do you talk about the need for volunteers at St. Mary's with the parish?
How to talk with them about it. Well, like you were saying, I think it has to do with messaging. I know one thing, I know the personal invite is the most effective. So to be able to share with them, like for instance, with the bereavement ministry, just that there is a need for just if we could be with the people as far as from the beginning with the packet and walking, maybe even being present at the funeral, maybe even if there's a collation here, just kind of being there to walk through all of that. How would you ask for volunteers for that is something I'm struggling with, but it's just basically sharing the importance of how lost people are in this moment in their lives. For some, they've never been through it. It's like they've been to funerals, they've lost family members, but as far as being in charge of overseeing the funeral and all of the wake and everything that goes with that, a lot of these people come in here, it's the first time they've ever done it, and they're completely lost. So it's just to help engage people to understand that this is meeting a need, a very great need that affects all of us, and that this is a great opportunity to show God's love in a time of a great deal of sadness. So to be able to wrap that somehow to convey that is really showing Christ's love for them in this time, is just walk with them and help them to carry this in this time of their life, carry them through this process. But how do I effectively share that? And just saying that's where I
Sure. No, that's great, Gloria.
We've actually run several volunteer campaigns when we transitioned into the rebuilt model here, and we were running campaigns where, and actually some of the campaigns worked very, very well. And we got people to volunteer. It was having those people stay in a role of volunteering. we do our annual open house, which is all about, letting people know what we are, what we have that they can get involved in. And we actually just put, sign up sheets where then we can get back to people individually and give them more information
Yeah.
if they want to volunteer. So yeah, I would think, especially several years ago. Now we do opening announcements at the beginning of Mass. Sometimes they're there, and like Gloria said, that one-on-one tap on the shoulder and say, "Hey, listen, thought you'd be good for this ministry. This is what I
Yeah.
see."
Fantastic examples to both of you, and that's great to hear of the kind of targeted campaigns that you've done to that in terms of messaging. That's really great ideas. I want to talk about priming now. So we've talked about how do we discern, and so there's this concept of priming where you get people ready, like you prime the pump before you make the ask. And I want to talk about it in two ways: general priming and specific priming. In other words, when you do it out in general to the community about the need to volunteering versus specific priming. In other words, we need this specific role or the specific ministry. We want to speak just to that. So I want to because there's a value to doing both, and there's times for doing both. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start with maybe the idea of general priming. So there's a couple of ways, and I think perhaps Benny and Gloria, you could even speak to this in seeing that you've done some campaigns already that are really good. There's no substitution for the power of the pulpit. There's no substitution for what's called really a message series, which there's a series of homilies targeted for a theme over specific Sundays. There's actually a sample homily series based off volunteering that's included in the Google link that is shared in the chat that ultimately then builds up to, on the third Sunday, of an ask to the parish. And so that's the idea of priming: is you don't just preach and say you need to get involved, but over a couple of weekends, you talk about the biblical roots, how our call as baptized Catholics for being involved, what it means to be a part of a parish, how Christ calls us to be involved, how our parish is growing to involve, and then inviting people to get involved and take a small, concrete action that is very low and doable, so that it's more likely that they do. So message series is always a very powerful way. A message coming from your pastor is always going to land with an individual a lot more. It simply is. A good communications plan. It's not really enough to just put something in a bulletin. I know myself, I'm a dad, 3 kids and a wife. We're usually running to church. We'll get there on time, and we'll try to linger, but then we have to leave. And so we usually don't pick up a bulletin. So if you put it on social media or you send me a message, I'll probably read it. But if your call for the ministry and the parish feast was in the bulletin, you can say, well, it was in the bulletin for 5 weeks. I'm probably not going to see it, even though I'm at Mass every single Sunday. And so as opposed to if you send me a direct message, say using a platform like Flocknote, I'm more likely that I'm going to read it. So communications plans in terms of who you want to target.
Countries that have been fighting so long and
also needs to be mindful of who you're trying to target, that there are different populations that simply respond to different forms of communication, one better than other. And so a good communications plan just does take hitting a variety of platforms. It does take making an ask via your website, via your bulletin, via announcements, via social media, via direct messaging, via word of mouth, as targeted to the people that you do want to reach. I've shared before with me that if people aren't complaining that you're saying your mission too much, you're not saying it enough. So in some ways, if you're not oversaturating people with this is how you can be involved and help, and people aren't complaining about it, maybe we aren't actually sharing it enough. Another way that can be very effective in general priming is sharing testimonies. Gloria, to the great example of bereavement, a lot of people might be unfamiliar with what bereavement really is until they lose a loved one. And there's this great piece of just empathy that most people who want to help in an area have been affected by that area personally in some way. And so sharing testimonies both of those who have been involved in such a ministry or a program and how it changed them, or conversely, sharing the testimonies of participants, the recipients of a ministry or program, and how that service aided them, helps build a value proposition for how we can generate an impact. Two questions we should really always ask ourselves, again, in general priming, is we can always put an ask out there, but is it really clear to people how they can help if they really wanted to? In other words, do we make it difficult, even if inadvertently, for someone to be involved? Do they have to dig for information? Do they have to make several phone calls? Do they have to go through several pages on the website? Or is it extremely clear in a lot of ways and kind of apparent of, if you're looking to involve, this is how. This is a clear next step that you can take. And is the information on how to take that next step clear in multiple ways? Again, volunteering can be a challenge to get people to volunteer. So we have to make it, as a first step, really, really easy for people to just get more information. And it has to be really, really easy for them to hear about it. And we know how life works. It's true of even of us. Sometimes it takes hearing it the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th time for someone to finally make a move. In business world, we talk about 7 touches. It usually takes 7 touches for someone to finally move on a product or make a decision. And if someone right, it's not the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Sometimes it's the 7th, 8th, or 9th time. So don't ever be discouraged where we've done this and it's worked sometimes and it hasn't. Some of this is just turning the flywheel again and again. But let's talk about specific priming. And part of it is, okay, so you've made your list of people, let's say, for the specific role. Well, how well do you know those people? Is someone that you discerned with, do they know those people? Because if you just go up to someone randomly and ask them, hey, we need this role, maybe if their disposition is open to it, they'll say yes. But if they really don't know who you are or have a rapport with you of some sense, they're probably going to be hesitant in some way. So before we even make the ask, we have to prime to ask, how do we get to know them? How do we have initial conversations with them? How do we build initial trust? Which is also just the good first steps in evangelization in general. And you don't have to make every ask. Part of this could be that connector you named, could be those 2 to 3 people you discerned with, that you say, all right, here's 6 people we want to invite. You take 2, I'll take these 3, you take those 2. Can you go in and have a conversation with them because you know them best and they're more likely to talk to you? So kind of actually thinking through who talks to them is part of priming and making those initial connections with them before you actually make an ask. So general priming is always good, especially like on certain weekends of the year where you are going to be very present in the ask and about the need for volunteers, but you may not be doing every weekend. You pick some targeted weekends and you could decide when to do those weekends around really when your need is. So in other words, if you're going to do a big push at Advent and Christmas to welcome back newcomers, and you're really going to need a hospitality ministry, it's probably a good idea to do that ask sometime around October, where people are kind of back in the swing of fall. You do the big ask and a big message series in October. That way you can collect names, work with them and prep them in November, so you can run a great hospitality campaign in Advent and Christmas. So it does take a little bit of forethought in terms of when you want to do some general priming or specific priming. That being said, we've talked a little bit around asking. So I want to share here, when you have asked people, what's really been helpful? I know some here have shared that personal ask has been really successful, but what else have you found to be really successful that when you ask people to help, it's like, yeah, they usually really respond well to this?
Hi, David. It's Kathy Cabral.
Hey, Kathy.
I know for us, I'm part of the OCIA team, and I worked with the Faith Formation with Melissa DeTerra this past year, and the families are involved all the time. The children, after the first couple of times that we asked them to say help at the pancake breakfast or collect canned goods during the Thanksgiving, after the first couple of times, the children amazingly are excited to help. And because the family has been involved from the get-go, the whole family gets excited to help. So I mean, I think when starting the kids young and having them help, even in small ways, is crucial to having them continue that. I mean, the young kids at St. Joseph's are incredible. They all want to help all the time, and I'm praying that that continues after confirmation. But it's a good way to get the whole family involved too.
Absolutely. That's a great example. Yeah. I mean, serving is a muscle that we have to work. And sometimes we
Right.
don't work it because it's not that we couldn't, we just haven't been used to doing it. So making low entry points, low asks, low risk pieces, building that habit, that's an awesome example, Kathleen. Other thoughts or examples?
I have sometimes found it pretty helpful to be specific about what I'm asking people to do. I need you to clean up. I need you to serve. I need you. So just the more details I can give people, the better.
Yeah, if people know what they're getting into, they're more likely to commit to that yes for a longer period of time. Granted, there's always going to be a challenge with volunteers where when they're not paid, you can't really hold them to a certain level. So if life changes, naturally there might be a revolving door. That just comes partly with the territory. But as much information we can give them up front without them being overwhelmed, and especially giving them a first taste or experience of it, so that way they can kind of see again the value of it before taking them deeper, that can help definitely with some longevity. So great point, Julie. So let's start talking about some asks, how to go about making asks, both generally and specifically. So we've talked about discerning, all right? We need to know the purpose of our ministry. We need to define what the need is. We need to kind of discern with other individuals, who knows people, who's out there, of around who would be good, and kind of actually making a list of names, and this being an ongoing practice. Then we need to kind of prime the pump. Generally, how do we talk to our parish about volunteerism and the need for it in general? How do we preach on it? How do we communicate it? How do we make it easy to sign up or to share I want to help? Or how do we build a relationship with individuals that we want to ask first? So after you've kind of discerned and you've primed, well, how do we go about making these asks? And in some ways, like the message series, like the priming, you can have times throughout the year where you're always making general asks. And some of the ways you can create general asks is having parishioners complete a brief, like I want to learn how to help, like a card in the pew or something on their phone or something on their website, where this is kind of built into that example homily series that's in the shared drive, where it's, you talk about this for 3 weekends, and at the third weekend, you have to have them take an action. Take them to do have them do a noticeable step, but that's really low risk, which is simply all you're doing is giving your name, your number, and email to say, yeah, I'd like to help. I may not know how, I may not know where, but I feel called now to help in my parish. Please contact me. And all that is a low risk ask if I want more information. And then it's on the parish and you can even have them list like, hey, here's some of my skill sets if you want. It's on the parish and reach back out or connect them with the right people and say, let's just have a conversation around, what are you looking to do? And this way, it's more likely they might help, because it's not so much of the church saying, do something for me, but it's actually shifting the conversation to saying, how can we fill your need to want to serve as an individual? And so much more custom tailoring, if this is what your need is for help and how you want to help and how you want to serve, we can then kind of broker that and facilitate that in such a way, as opposed to saying, help us in this way. So there's 2 ways that we can go about it. Having a small, actionable way where they do it right then in the pew, maybe at the end of Mass, after Mass, at the end of the homily, or where they can do it on their phone or on the website. That could even always be constant, especially if it's digitally, is a great way of doing a general ask. The second is, there was great success with the call by name initiative in the diocese and in other dioceses for vocations, where individuals say, give a name of someone who they think could be good for the priesthood. There's nothing to say that a similar methodology couldn't work for general volunteerism. You may not want to give your name, but you might want to throw someone else under the bus. And so who is someone that you're like, hey, I really see gifts and talents in this person, and I think they're an asset to our parish, and I want to give their name for you to reach to them. And what a great conversation that is to say. I mean, wouldn't it be feeling great to get a call to say, someone recommended you to us? Like someone said that you had these gifts and we just want to have a conversation with you about the parish and what you do and, you know, how you might be able to use that gift that someone saw in you. So you're doing a similar kind of call by name approach for just volunteers in general could be very fascinating and interesting. Again, some of you have already named how to just have regular mechanisms, ministry fairs, open house, targeted weekends. Ministry fairs in general may or may not get a ton of signups, but they do kind of create this consistency of awareness of what is available and how people could get involved. The one thing, though, that a parish does need to be mindful of is what is your expectations for getting volunteers? In other words, to a certain degree, when everything's important, nothing's important. And so if you're okay with saying we're just trying to get more people involved, great, make general asks. And it's just kind of a slower process. But if you want to get a lot of volunteers for a certain ministry or certain push the church is doing, that does need to take precedence in terms of messaging. Otherwise, it could get lost in the shuffle. So there is some discernment on part of the parish to discern what are we prioritizing and how are we making general asks. When you're looking to make then more of a specific ask, and some of you have already insinuated this, one-on-one is very much the best approach. Inviting someone for a one-on-one conversation, not necessarily just a phone call. Leading with a why, giving a sense of purpose first. Sharing what you see in them and how they can be part of fulfilling the need that you're talking about. Making it specific and clear. And especially whenever possible, offering a first serve opportunity. In other words, what you're asking them to do is not committing to the year, but maybe this one date, this one time. So that way, after they do it, you can follow up with them and saying, you've served once, would you be willing to serve again? And the way that can work in ministries is if you have someone who's already on the team or as a mentor, you can pair them with them. So you don't feel like, what on earth am I doing? And that was a negative experience so much as they're kind of shadowing, if you will, as a first serve. And they're like, I could see myself doing it. I saw Matthew was leading that small group and I saw what he did. And I'm like, yeah, that's something I could probably do. So again, if we discern well who we're asking and what they're asking them for, and we prime well by kind of getting to know them a little bit, and we make it a clear ask, it's much more likely that yes will increase. So remember, part of this is just consistency. Keep turning the flywheel. If you're familiar with Alpha and the Alpha series, which runs a small group series throughout the country, they would have an Alpha conference. And they had a whole session just dedicated to people getting up and saying, how many people did you invite to go to an Alpha series? And the more people said, say I invited 50 people, how many people said yes? 5. People would cheer. And if they said, I invited 75 people and only 3 showed up, the cheers got louder. And the whole premise was to desensitize and demystify this pain of hearing no. That it's okay to hear no, but if we never ask, we're never going to hear yes. So remember the innovation curve. It does take time. Start with your top 5% and then work to your 18% to help you generate who you can ask and to be involved. And you're naturally going to hear no more times than yes, but never give up on that piece. It's okay. And the last piece I really want to clarify is make sure to follow up with someone. If someone completes a I want to know more card or form on your website, make sure they get a phone call within a week. If someone registers to the parish and lists interest, make sure that an applicable person for their interest actually contacts them and it's not kind of falling through. If you do give a message series in a campaign, have a reminder about a few weeks later for those who either weren't present that weekend at Mass or who forgot to kind of complete that next step. If someone receives a letter or a phone call from the parish and they don't respond, follow up with an email. If someone does do a first serve, make sure to follow up with them to have an individual conversation of how it went and if they want to continue. There is just a need to follow up. And if someone agrees to show up and then they don't show up, which does occur, people might just ghost us. Have a soft follow-up of saying, hey, we missed you. If you'd like to still help, please let us know. And it's a soft way of allowing them to re-enter without putting too much pressure on them. So I want to give, as we kind of close in our time today, one last example of how I kind of worked on this in a parish setting. So I worked for a parish in New Jersey, and I oversaw a program for middle schoolers and high schoolers that together was about 400 students. And we, to start, had about only so many helpers that were paid. If you can believe it, volunteerism was so bad that the parish actually paid catechists to lead the program. And naturally, that's a pretty unsustainable way to handle parish finances for anyone here on the Finance Council. You're going to run out of money eventually. And so we had to change that. And so simply stop paying most of the people. What naturally happened? We lost a lot of volunteers. And here I am with 400 students and very few people to lead the program. And so I kind of had to create a mechanism to discern, prime, and ask people to join that never really had done before. So what I first started doing is I looked at the attendance lists of students who went to the middle school program. That was part of my focus, was building up middle school. I had 300 students just in 6th, 7th, 8th, and 5th. And I said, well, who comes pretty regularly? Because if your kid is coming pretty regularly, this probably matters to you to some degree. So I'm going to find out who has perfect attendance, and I'm going to put those parents' name on my list. Then I'm going to watch kind of the first year, and I say, which parents kind of linger? They actually come to the door. They might actually have a conversation with me. They may actually come in and stay for the last 15 minutes. In other words, they don't just stay in their car and wait for their kid to come out to them. So I'm going to put them on my list. I'm going to be present at masses, especially on Sunday. When I took my job working there, my pastor at the time said, Sunday's a work day. This is when people are here. You have to be here. And so I would watch, as Mother, I know you've mentioned before, which of those parents are also here, which adults are really present at church. I might approach them. And then when we did registration, we would usually do it in June. I would say, who are the first parents, for ours, we had a larger program, who's the first 100 parents that signed up their kids? Because in my thinking, if you're going to sign up right away, this might matter to you to some degree. And once I did that, I had a pretty decent list of individuals to ask. And once I had that list, I kind of discussed with my colleagues about those names. And that also aided us avoiding people asking the same person. Where then if there was someone that someone else wanted to ask, we could discern maybe where they're best fit so that multiple people aren't asking them to do the same thing. They're getting one targeted ask, so they're more likely to say yes. Then I primed. I had volunteer opportunities. Even I made volunteer job descriptions, and I posted them high and wide. We put on the website. We put on our social media. We had biweekly e-blasts to the families. And I even sent out information to local high schools to their campus ministers, and the campus ministers are local colleges. We had a couple colleges in the area, and so I would meet with the campus minister and I said, who are your top 5% of students? Who would be a really good leader for maybe middle schoolers? And I actually got some names from those campus ministers of people they thought would be good to maybe say lead a small group. And so I kind of expanded my list from there. Based on that list, I then reached out to those parents individually. And what I really just invited them to was not to hey, I want to ask you to help. It was we're trying to better understand our parents' needs. Would you be willing to grab coffee after work? Some of them worked in the evening, so during the day. And probably in the months of February and March that year, I took more parents out to coffee and spent more money on coffee than I did in my life. And when I've shared this with people, they say, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. And the answer is, yes, it is. But I had 400 students and I had very little help. And so, like I said, it just does take front loading to help me avoid burnout later on. And I will say, those one-on-one meetings with parents, if there's nothing anyone else ever does, it was the most efficacious and successful thing I ever did. It is the one thing I would really recommend anyone to do, because several things were accomplished when I met one-on-one with them. People are like, we don't know parents, we don't know how to engage them. I was having, in 1 month, at least 20 conversations, personal conversations of, who are you? What are you worried about in your life? What do you like about your parenting? What's your hopes for your family? Like, we were having in-depth conversations about people's just struggles. And then I was able to then share, hey, this is what we're trying to do as a parish. This is how we can come alongside you and help you. Once you kind of had that conversation, the ask for a need became so much easier, because it wasn't me just trying to get your time. I was actually trying to help you be like, this is how we actually can help your family. Much more willing to be open to that kind of an ask. We also had certain times during the year we'd have teens give kind of testimonies. We would do this specifically during Advent and Lent, and they weren't necessarily tied to, like, say, a campaign for volunteering, but it gave visibility to our program and saying, listen, this is the impact that we're having. And so it seems like this is a good thing. So when we make the ask, yeah, that's a great thing. I've heard those teams talk before. They do good stuff there. I'd like to get involved. And our pastor was always very big in our bulletin, have tons of pictures, to the point where people complain, why are we always seeing so many pictures of young people? And that's a great problem to have. When people in your parish complain that there are too many instances of young people being involved, you usually don't hear that. So we saturated it with saying, look, this is a priority. This is something we're doing. Look at what is happening. And it helped just give a general priming that was always very good. Then we made the ask. Usually the specific asks I would make were in the context of those one-on-one coffee conversations at the end. But we also had general. So what we did is we did kind of do a letter campaign to those first 100 parents who registered. I created it, a generic one. Father signed it, but I took care of all the work of the list of who was going to go to. And I would tailor each letter to, if this parent signed up for this night, I would ask them to help with that specific night. And so we kind of did a first serve, which was allowed in the archdiocese we were in terms of the mechanisms of just logistics and safe environment. We made sure we had all that protocol up and running, and we had the right amount of people that were safe environment trained to help, but it was permitted within the first 30 days that you could help once in our kind of context. And so we invited them to that one specific date to help in a low risk way. And then what I did is I follow up with them after to help. We sent 100 letters. I heard back from 25 of them. 20 of them said yes, and 18 of those 20 decided to help after their first serve. So in just one low-risk letter campaign, there's an example of what that letter is in that dual link. I had 18 more parents in 1 year start helping before that didn't, and just help that much more. And it was very important that we followed up. Once they sent that letter, I sent an email following up 1 to 2 weeks afterwards. And lastly, like I said, once they helped once, I ensured to call them again and follow up and say, how did it go? And, would you like to help again, and how we can support you? And what's really important to that is giving them support and communication so they didn't feel like they were out there by themselves. When I gave them a way to help, I would send a plan with what exactly was going to happen that night and what they were going to do at least a week ahead of time, so they had time to review it. Rather than having a ton of meetings, we would huddle right before the meeting to go over it, and then we would meet right afterwards to debrief. And then lastly, I wouldn't put them in roles they wouldn't be comfortable with. I only put them in roles that I thought they could actually do, so that way they didn't feel discouraged and they could help. So that was one example way of how we kind of put this discern, prime, ask, and follow up in practice at our parish over in Jersey.